right now can jumpstart domestic manufacturing to protect and build good family supporting jobs, especially for the workers and communities who need them most. If we fail to make the investments and implement these policies, we will miss out on this opportunity that stands before us. But if we seize this moment, we take a powerful step forward to sustain and create high quality union jobs, tackle the climate crisis, and fight the economic and racial injustice that weakens our nation. Building back better can and must deliver for workers and communities, bottom line. One person who understands and champions that belief, perhaps better than anyone, is President Joe Biden, which is why I'm delighted to introduce as our opening speaker, the president's top economic advisor, Brian Deese, who is the director of the National Economic Council, where he coordinates and implements the president's economic policy objectives. Brian, thanks for taking the time today, for joining us. I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jason. And, I just want to, before I start, I just want to say a huge thank you to Jason, to the entire Blue Green Alliance, which, at its very core, its very concept is so resonant with the way the president thinks about this economy and the Economic Policy Institute for decades of work to build the economic basis for so much of what we're going to be talking about today. I want to start where you left off, Jason, and just say something that I think probably doesn't need to bear repeating for this group, but does need to bear repeating generally, which is that President Biden wears as a symbol of pride the moniker that he's the most pro-union president in American history. And we are, on his behalf, as a team and as an administration, charting a new economic course of what it actually means to grow an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, what it means to actually advance worker organizing, collective bargaining, union density at the core of an economic agenda, so that workers have more power, families have more breathing room. And I'm quite proud to be part of a team that can serve a president who puts the voices and concerns of the workers at the center of how he thinks about everything, but how he thinks in particular about the climate crisis. And I actually think there isn't a better example of what that means, the stakes, the challenges, and the opportunities than in the transportation vehicle space and the opportunity to revive manufacturing in America. It's striking the change that we're seeing in the American auto industry. I was involved with the American auto industry back in 2009 when a former president was faced with stark choices of whether or not we were even going to have a future and a manufacturing base that was built on the backbone of the auto industry. And in the decade or a little over a decade since then, we've just seen this extraordinary evolution toward electric vehicles, the rapid decline in battery prices, the rapid advances in charging speed, charging capacity, and the proliferation of models available to U.S. consumers. It's remarkable, and I think if you look at the trajectory of technology and cost and performance, we are seeing an inexorable line in the global EV industry to the auto market is going electric. And so that's why the president has taken a pretty clear view on this, which is the question is not, we've moved well beyond the question whether the electric vehicle transition will happen, but how do we make sure that in the United States, we come out as the global leader in this industry across battery, plug-in hybrid, fuel cell electric markets, and we do so in a way that builds more strength in domestic manufacturing and good jobs with more opportunities for our workers. You all know today that is a real constructive challenge. China accounts for 80% of the manufacturing capacity of EV batteries, and that wasn't an accident. China has made a set of deliberate choices over the last decade to build that capability and strength. using non-market techniques to do so. And that's the stakes. That's what we're up against. The flip side of that, though, the implications for the economy, for our workers, our middle class, for our manufacturing capability are enormous. And I think, EPI's latest research and the work that you all have done confirms this. Winning this market in the right way means not only hundreds of thousands of good paying union jobs, it could actually be the key to revitalizing regional economies with cutting edge manufacturing capabilities that, as the auto industry always has, serves as a backbone, but also drives backward linkages and forward linkages up and down the supply chain that has such an impact across our economy. So we're all in here, and the president has laid out a comprehensive strategy for how we win and win in the right way. And I would just flag five quick elements of that. First, we are raising the ambition of our EV growth targets. Last month, he was proud here with the UAW and the major American automakers to stand together with members of Congress to target 50% of all new passenger vehicles sold to be electric by 2030. And that's a commitment that we are moving in lockstep with the industry. It's where the industry wants to go and wants to actually exceed that. Second, we need to invest directly in our workers and our direct domestic manufacturing capacity. And that's what the Build Back Better plan being debated in Congress would do. That means loans and tax credits to incentivize production assembly of these vehicles in the United States. It means grants toward new battery parts and production in the United States. It means financing to repurpose and retool existing plants to prevent the scenario where existing factories become obsolete and the current workers have to watch others have the opportunity to jobs, but instead to retool and reposition existing facilities so that the current workers have the first shot and the opportunity to advance for jobs in industries in this in the electric vehicle supply chain. And it also means incentives for sector-based training, workforce development to make sure that that there are good-paying union job opportunities in this supply chain. All of that would build on what we're already trying to do, including deploying American Rescue Plan funding for that effort, but we need a more significant, focused, dedicated effort in building that capability. Third, we would invest historically in research and development. Investments that are critical to maintaining the pace of technological development in battery and semiconductor technology, and importantly, make sure that that research is done here, and that when public dollars are used in research that helps break through innovations, that those are connected to outcomes that are going to be better for American workers and American taxpayers, and also to do that research all across America too, and bring communities that have not been dealt in to that effort into the game as well. Fourth, we need to push policies to generate stronger consumer demand. And I see Representative Kildee here, who is in the process of forgetting more about this than I know. Thank you so much for your leadership on this. This is a plane that is hard to land. It's hard to land. There's a lot of pieces involved. One of the first things I did in 2009 was work with a number of members of Congress to try to land cash for clunkers, an earlier and much less sophisticated version of this. But these planes are hard to land. This has got to land with the leadership of Representative Kildee and others to make sure that we actually have incentives for people to afford affordable EVs. Typical families can afford them. And critical to that is investing in a national network of EV chargers that are going to put tens of thousands of IBEW workers to work building the backbone of this country. I think if there was one thing that President Biden talked more about on the campaign than what it would mean to have 550,000 EV charging stations around this country, I can't think of it right now. That is a game changer in terms of giving typical families the comfort that if they buy a new union-made EV in America, they'll have the ability to use it, whether they live in a rural, less populated community or in a big urban center. And lastly, if we do all of those things well, we can strengthen vehicle emissions and fuel efficiency standards, EPA and DOT working together to set the high ambition, what we need to meet our climate targets, but do it in a way that builds domestic strength. So that's the plan. It's complicated, it's ambitious, but also it's right in front of us. None of what I just described is far off in the future or requires anything other than drive, ingenuity, focus, commitment of a group like this to help get done. And that's what I would just say at the end. Your partnership, your advocacy, your research have gotten us to a point where we can advance an agenda like the one I just described, which is exciting. We got a lot of challenges in front of us, but this is a moment where we really could change the game and look back a decade from now when the United States is exporting our technologies around the world, and that there are more job opportunities here in the US because we have a growing share of a growing global market, and say, we delivered on an industrial strategy that actually put workers at the center, and nothing would make us happier. And I think we have that within our sights. So thanks again for everything you're doing. Thanks for having me, Jason and team, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Brian. We like that plan. So thank you for joining us, and thanks to the administration, to you, the president, for your leadership on this issue. We now turn to speakers who have been leaders in Congress on issues that impact manufacturing workers, communities in the auto sector. For that reason, I'm very pleased to introduce Congressman Dan Kildee, who serves Michigan's 5th District and sits on the House Ways and Means Committee, who is a tireless champion and advocate for working people and his constituents. Congressman?
Well, thank you, Jason, and the Blue Green Alliance and the Economic Policy Institute for inviting me to speak here today, and for all the great work you're doing. And it's good to see my friend, Mr. Deese, and I've been working so closely with the White House and Senator Stabenow. We're close, and we're going to get this over the finish line. Last week, we held an historic markup in the Ways and Means Committee. We advanced President Biden and the Democrats' Build Back Better agenda. This is a once in a generation opportunity that we have. We have to remind ourselves of that. This is a real once in a generation opportunity to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, to cut taxes for the middle class, to create good paying jobs, and all the while making sure that the biggest corporations and the wealthiest Americans pay their fair share. And that's what this Build Back Better agenda does. It puts money in people's pockets, regular Americans. We pay for all of this by repealing the Trump tax cuts for the wealthiest and the largest corporations, and make them just pay their fair share. Unlike the Trump tax cut bill, it won't add to the deficit over the long run. Instead, we actually cover the cost of making the wealthiest pay their fair share. So as a part of this Build Back Better budget, we've been working to make sure that workers have a seat at the table. One of the key priorities that I've been working on, along with President Biden and his team and my very close long-term friend, Senator Stabenow, is to expand the electric vehicle tax credit for working class and middle class families. We know, as Mr. Deese just said, electric vehicles are the future of the American auto industry. This is where the market is already moving. So here's our choice. It's a simple one. Do we let China continue to dominate the production of electric vehicles, or do we make the strategic investments now that will result in American workers, union workers, making these vehicles right here in the United States for generations to come? That's the choice we face. And where we stand is really clear. I choose American workers. I choose American jobs. Electric vehicles also, beyond that, obviously, will help us combat this climate crisis. The transportation sector is currently the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. So as we work to increase the number of electric vehicles on the road and expand charging stations, cars will emit less greenhouse gases than traditional combustion engines. And that's why I'm so proud that the Biden-Kildee-Stabenow approach to this has the support of great environmental organizations, the League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, the Environmental Defense Action Fund, the National Natural Resources Defense Council. So here's how this credit works for Michigan families that I represent, but working families all over the country. For any consumer looking to buy an electric vehicle, you'd get an immediate tax cut since you'd be eligible for a $7,500 credit. But additionally, and importantly, if your new electric car is built in the United States, assembled by union workers, you have an additional $4,500 off the price of that vehicle. And finally, if your electric vehicle battery is manufactured in the United States, there's another $500 credit. That's up to $12,500 off the price of a new electric vehicle, immediately discounted and available to the consumer. How do we do that? We've updated existing law in this proposed legislation to make the electric vehicle credit fully refundable and transferable at the point of sale to the dealer. So the consumer sees that immediate benefit, that immediate tax cut to reduce the price of that vehicle. Many of you know I come from Flint, Michigan, and I'm proud that my own hometown helped put the world on wheels. In Flint and all over my home state of Michigan, automobiles mean good paying American jobs. And that's why I'm so committed to getting this credit over the finish line. It will support good paying Michigan jobs, American jobs, union jobs. So for me, this is pretty simple. We're spending American tax dollars. That support should go to American workers. I know the history of my own community, the history of this country. Unions built the middle class. Unions create good paying jobs that can support a family. And that's why I'm proud that this legislation has the support of unions like the United Auto Workers, the AFL-CIO, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And when it comes to the Biden-Kildee Stabenow credit, unions and the big three are on the same side. GM, Ford, Stellantis all support this legislation. That's a critical moment. That doesn't happen that often. And it's because of support from both labor and environmental groups that Blue Green Alliance is here supporting this legislation. And as Jason said, some argue that we can't support both good paying jobs and combat the climate crisis. With this bill and this Build Back Better agenda, we're showing these skeptics that they're wrong. Finally, just a couple other points. This legislation, as we wrote it in the House, improves the EV credit and with the work of Senator Stabenow in a number of important ways that we really have to point out. First, we've crafted this legislation to make sure that the EV tax credit goes to working and middle-class families, not the wealthiest Americans. To be eligible for the credit, we have an adjusted gross income limit to ensure that the wealthiest Americans are not eligible. Second, we have MSRP limits so that luxury vehicles, the most expensive vehicles, are not eligible for the credit. Again, the focus is on making the price of an electric vehicle lower for working class and middle class families, not those who are wealthy who make those choices without considering the cost. Finally, we make the credit available immediately to consumers so that working families, middle class families see an immediate reduction at the point of sale in the cost of the electric vehicle. I'm proud of our work on this electric vehicle tax credit. It'll be better for the people I represent. And today I'm in the House Ways and Means Committee. We've been working to get this done. I'm confident that we're going to advance this important Build Back Better budget and the EV tax credit forward. So thank you so very much for including me in this discussion. This is a transformational moment. We have to embrace it. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And thank you for your leadership on this issue. It's an absolute pleasure to work with you and your staff. Michigan Senior Senator has already been invoked as a great lead-in. It's now my pleasure to introduce U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow. She is a longtime champion for clean energy and the American auto industry and American auto workers. She is now continuing that work as a champ on advanced manufacturing policies that support our efforts to build the plants and supply chains we need to successfully make things here in America. Senator Stabenow.
Jason, it's great to be with you and to be with all my friends and partners in all of this. Brian Dees, thank you so much for your work and partnership way back. You know, we were together back in 2009 when we were involved in making sure we had an American automobile industry. And so appreciate you. And my partner, Dan Kildee, Congressman Kildee. So it's wonderful working with Congressman Kildee and being able to bring this together in the House and the Senate, what we're talking about the next generation of clean energy vehicles and all that goes with that. And I really want to say thank you to the Blue Green Alliance for your important work. I remember when you were created and all the incredible work that you have done to build a clean energy economy and create millions of jobs. And you've been saying, and I've been saying for a long time, you don't have to pick between tackling the climate crisis and having a clean energy economy and having good paying jobs. And we are seeing that true in Michigan now and across the country as we look at all the component parts that need to be used, not just automobiles, but wind turbines, solar panels, geothermal, all of the other things. I remember at one point telling someone there were 8,000 parts in one of those great big wind turbines, and we can make every one of those in Michigan. So, you know, this is about jobs and about doing the right thing. So our kids and our grandkids actually have a future in terms of what we're doing on the climate crisis. And I want to take a minute because Dan did a great job of walking through our tax rebate. And I will say, just to add to what Dan had indicated, we have now structured this, even though it's through the tax code, for folks to be able to get the benefit of it right when they buy the automobile. And so this is important. You don't have to wait till your tax time. You're going to be able to get that discount right off the price of the vehicle, which I think is going to make it even more attractive. But if we back up a bit about why are we doing all this? Why is Brian talking about all this? Why is the president talking about this? Why are all of us doing this? And by the way, I love that we have a president of the United States that says the word union over and over again. I think that's wonderful. But why are we doing this? Well, when we look at what is happening all around us right now, and the climate crisis is hitting us really right in the face, we're taking a look at the cost of doing nothing. I chair our Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, and this week I released a report that lays out what's happening by inaction in terms of the cost to all of us. And last year alone, we had 22 separate billion-dollar disasters in our country. Never happened before in terms of the number, where they're going up and up and up. The intensity, as we know, and the number of incidences. And in the last 5 years, American taxpayers have spent an average of $126 billion a year in damages, just picking up the pieces. And that doesn't count the loss of life involved as well. And so we can't continue to ignore this. And by the way, we're debating right now whether or not we can do a plan over 10 years that would be about $350 billion a year in investments in our future and lowering the costs for people, the kinds of things that keep them up at night. But the reality is, if we keep going, it's going to be 2-3 years maybe before we're going to actually be spending $350 billion a year just on picking up the pieces, if we are not addressing what's happening on the climate crisis. And we know that the transportation sector is the largest source of carbon pollution that's driving the crisis. And that's why we are so focused on EVs. Vehicles, obviously, small vehicles, big vehicles, trucks, vans, school buses. I mean, we are talking about electrification in transportation. And as was said before, it's not whether it's going to happen, it's where it's going to happen. So you've got China already spending over $100 billion to own electric vehicles and the batteries that are produced and so on. And they're going to be doing more, others doing more. The question is, what are we going to do in America? And that's really what we're talking about with our EV legislation that is going through as part of the Build Back Better budget. So we have the EV credit, and we do build on the traditional $7,500 by adding a bonus if it's union workers, and I'm proud that we're doing that. And if the battery's made in the United States, and I think that's important as well. And after the first 5 years, if you want to get the base credit of $7,500, then it's got to be made in the United States. And so we've got a lot of, unfortunately, of the companies from around the world that are making vehicles in the United States that don't think it's enough that because they're making automobiles in the United States, that they're going to get a $7,500 tax credit towards their consumers buying their vehicles. They don't like the fact that we're adding something that will reward good paying union jobs. And I think it's a very, very important policy, and we intend to make sure that this gets all the way to the finish line. Let me also just talk about one other piece of this, though, and that is the supply chain. We want people buying the vehicles. We have to have people incentivized to buy these vehicles and feel comfortable, not having range anxiety, that we're going to be able to make sure they can charge them wherever they are, and that people understand that these are very cool vehicles, and we are wanting to make sure that people feel that they're convenient and affordable. We also want to make sure that the component parts in manufacturing of the vehicles and other manufacturing is done in the United States. This is critically important. So I'm, as a member of the Finance Committee, also laser focused on that, having authored a provision in the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act that we passed in the Senate to focus on semiconductors, not just broadly, but the kind we need for manufacturing. This is absolutely critical. We should not find ourselves down the road in a situation where we're dependent on one company in another country, in this case Taiwan, making over 50% of the type of part that we need, semiconductor chip that we need in order to make our vehicles. Shame on us if we don't fix that. And that's what we're in the process of doing. And the other thing is on batteries, both investment tax credit and production tax credit, leading the effort as well on that. We need that investment, those investments to be made in the United States. We need the jobs that come from what we do after in terms of recycling and repurposing and all the other things that come with this whole industry. We need to be doing that right in the United States. So all of those pieces, and there's other bill, 48C, which I'm authoring, which is a tax credit to retool our plants and so on. All the tax policy is very important. I will just end with this, and that is, it's also very important that we pass something called the PRO Act, so that we can, and I'm very proud to be a co-sponsor one more time on this, but we've got to make sure it doesn't matter what part of the economy you're in as a worker, that you have the freedom to organize and collectively bargain, and that we're lifting up wages and standard of living and retirement support for all of our workers all over our country. And we've got to get that passed as well. Let me just conclude one of my favorite Walter Reuther quotes. He said, "Labor is not fighting for a larger slice of the national pie. Labor is fighting for a larger pie." So we want to have as much opportunity in every part of our country for folks that are wanting to work and getting up every day, and they just want a fair shot and want to know somebody's got their back. And I'm proud to say we have a president who has their back, and Democratic majority in the House and the Senate that join in that. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, Senator. Thank you so much for joining us. We are honored to work with you and Congressman Kildee to fight for that bigger pie, and you couldn't have picked a better quote or a better messenger in invoking Walter Reuther. So thank you. We are now extremely pleased to be joined by Mayor Tito Brown of Youngstown, Ohio. Mayor Brown is a lifelong resident of the 3rd Ward of the city of Youngstown. The mayor provides an unparalleled local perspective on what reinvesting in manufacturing can mean to America's manufacturing communities. Mayor Brown.
Good afternoon, Jason. Thank you for that gracious introduction. I want to thank the Blue Green Alliance for allowing me to stop by and just say a few words about how this will impact cities like Youngstown, Ohio. But if I could have a personal, professional courtesy, and I just wanted to say hello to Congressman Dan Kildee. Dan might not remember, I used to work for the county treasurer in Mahoney County, and I remember all the great work that you did there. So Dan, big ups to you and where you are now. So I was excited to see you on there. Yeah, one of the things I like to always talk a little bit about when I speak about electric vehicles and batteries, I want to talk a little bit about my trip to China in 2019. It was eye-opening for various reasons, but for the conversation today, it's about electric batteries and the vehicles. And what I realized over in China, individuals who wanted electric vehicles had an opportunity to do so, but you had a little issue of what came with that. You couldn't keep your other vehicle. If you had a gasoline vehicle, you had to turn that in. You could only have 1 or 2 vehicles at a time in China, but it led me to believe that they were trying to reduce the emission. You know, it's different than what we do here in the United States. You can have all the type of vehicles you want, but if we're really going to be direct and really want to make an impact, we've really got to start saying that we need to take back and push down some of those fossil fuels that are out there. And also, it was almost you are identified. I don't know if this is a good or bad thing. When you had an electric vehicle, your license plates were a lot different than what everyone else's license plates look like. So I just thought it was a quick introduction to let you know China has really been serious about it. And I had a firsthand in 2019 to see that. But for me in the city of Youngstown, in 2027, the city of Youngstown will mark our 50th year since the closure of our steel mills. Now, as a legacy city, we've focused the history. We've had corporate corruption. We've had political corruption. We've had governmental mistrust. And under my administration, we've had to overcome many of those obstacles. I say that to say that we are still treading down the thought of the steel mills are coming back. And I have to be very honest with you that much of the mindset here is that individuals believe that steel mill and the steel industry will come back. And we're working on a mindset of removing the mindset that we're corrupt. We're removing the mindset that you can't trust government, but also removing the mindset of the workers who believe that the steel mills will be coming back. So we're focusing on really keeping a good eye on what's the next industry. And this, to me, is what we're talking about today is really a key factor. I think the inadequate education and lack of livable wage jobs has become a real problem in our community, further hindrance and for the recovery. We focus on a housing stock and transportation for those who need it, access for employment. You know, if we can find industries, we need to make sure that individuals have proper housing, transportation, but also they have access to the employment job that's there. The one thing I will say that the global pandemic has hit our town harder than most. COVID-19 has been a great revealer of health, social and economic and racial disparities of our community. The future of our economy in Youngstown and Mahoney Valley will largely depend on how we focus on as a region. I always look at the shutdown of the Lordstown plant, which is about 15 miles outside of the city of Youngstown. It had a direct impact on our economy. It was not just the workers of the plant, but it was also affected those who worked in the supply chain network. I really wanted to focus on that because the supply chain network hit harder. Since many of the auto workers had some options, and many of the option was relocate and moving in most cases, what we saw was that the supply chain worker did not have that option. So the industry closure has caused, housing and real estate issues in many parts of our community due to relocation. For me, I can give you a scenario in my neighborhood. We had about 3 homes that went up for sale because of the closure. In the future, we have to focus on diversification of transition to an industry is necessary. If we're going to be competitive, and I told you my story about China, they're not shy about being competitive. And I think the Congresswoman talked about it earlier, where they want to take over. The transition to electric vehicles will require a completely different focus on ensuring the next generation to come are ready to tackle this industry and technology head on. The workforce has to be job ready, job trained, and have job access to the 21st century jobs. We can no longer afford to talk about in theory. When this industry opportunity comes, we will be ready. I'm here to tell you the industry is here, and now we must be prepared to take advantage of this opportunity. I want to talk about 2 points of how we're getting prepared here in the city of Youngstown. We focused on advanced manufacturing in 2 ways. We focus on America Makes, which is the nation's leading collaborative partner in additive manufacturing and 3D printing technology. It's structured a little bit with the private-public partnership that focus on increasing the nation's global competitiveness across the sectors. And the second pieces are Youngstown State Center of Innovative Additive Manufacturing, which is focused on College of STEM and other academic divisions. The goal here is to get the next generation of students trained and ready for what manufacturing will look like. The center looks to expose our children at an earlier age so that we can compete in the industries. The great thing about these 2 centers is that the Innovative Center is only 1,000 feet from America Makes, which gives our staff and our students a greater advantage to work and learn to operate industry-leading laser melting printing, polymers, and molding printing. In full disclosure, I'm not sure what all that means, but I'm sure this is not the same technology that my grandfather had to learn in his manufacturing days. Small to medium-sized businesses are also feeling the impact of the pandemic, especially minority business, many of whom have not established a relationship in the banking institution. The need of Youngstown are no different from any other communities across the nation. When the city is barely rebounding from a 50-year economic decline because outside forces beyond our control, those rebounds have been further eviscerated by COVID-19. Whatever assistance is provided must be a long-term coordinated strategy to assure that the manufacturing jobs impacted transitions to electric vehicles and the supply chain is ready to produce. China is on its 3rd and 4th generation of electric batteries. Sustainable energy is going to happen, and we have to ensure in our leadership roles that we are ready for the electric, solar, and wind industry that will be happening. The impact of not being ready and not building up the industry of the future will have negative impact on housing, transportation, and small business efforts. If any component is ignored, we will have failed to take advantage of a legacy opportunity that will affect my grandchildren and my children's children. We have to prepare for the future of technology, energy, such as electric batteries, with a ready workforce, and research and create a market industry that transitions from here, being a steel valley of the past, but focusing on being the voltage valley of the future. It will be an ongoing challenge to ensure that we are not only build the next generation of electric vehicles here in the valley, but also create a supply chain that will come with the next generation of technology. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and we cannot just survive. We must thrive for the next and the well-being of the next generation. It's time for us to lead from the front and take on this global pandemic and this battle of the climate change head on. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation today.
Well, thank you, Mayor Brown. A pleasure to have you, and we really appreciate your leadership and your perspective. I'm now going to turn the mic over to my colleague, Zoe Lippman, who's going to move us into the rest of the program. Zoe?
Thanks very much, Jason. I'm Zoe Lippman, Director of Manufacturing and Advanced Transportation here at the Blue Green Alliance. And for the rest of our time here this morning, we're going to have 2 powerful panels. And between those, we hope to be joined by Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, but there are votes going on, so we'll let you know. Hopefully she'll join us. And I am going to jump right into our opening panel. I am honored to be here with a panel of experts who are ideally situated to set the stage for what's at stake today for manufacturing, for workers and communities as we shift to EVs and in the economy more broadly. We will discuss what role getting this shift right and others like it will play in building a more prosperous and equitable recovery, and what actions policymakers need to take, many of which we've just heard about and is exciting to be seeing underway right now in Congress to be sure we get there. We'll be hearing from Josh Bivens, Director of Research at the Economic Policy Institute, who will walk us through the findings of their brand new report released this morning. From Josh Nasser, Legislative Director at the UAW, the United Auto Workers, whose members build the vehicles and technology we're talking about today, along with workers throughout the manufacturing supply chain. And we're also honored to be joined by a leading economic voice on these topics, Janelle Jones, the Chief Economist at the US Department of Labor. And with that, I'll hand off to Josh Bivens.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to try to share screen and walk through a PowerPoint, and we'll see how successful that is. So hopefully at this point, people should be seeing a PowerPoint slide. I'll try to be quick. I'm the one presenting results today, but I will say this report is the result of a mammoth collaboration of a number of experts who've been extremely generous with their time and expertise. Honestly, if I tried to list them all individually right now, I'd burn through my time, but check out the acknowledgements in the report for the bare bones list of people who've been helpful on this. And obviously, particular credit needs to go to Jim Barrett, who is a co-author of this report and who honestly was the real workhorse of running the in-plan model. I say this not to implicate anybody in anything wrong here, but just to make it clear, this is a work of real collaboration. So just a big picture, what is this report? What is this report about? It shows the possible job consequences stemming from the large-scale adoption of battery electric vehicles in the US market under a range of scenarios regarding how successfully the US domestic auto sector, including parts, is able to claim market share along a variety of key margins in the production chain. I'm told by friends who know the real inside baseball of the auto sector that the word competitiveness has now been almost completely co-opted by bad actors to just mean wage suppression. That's a shame. In some sense, I think our policy scenarios are basically highlighting a high road to enhance competitiveness, one where reclaimed market share is driven not by racing to the bottom on wages, but by investing in technology and having supportive policy structures behind you. There are a couple of reasons for I think doing this report, and I think what it adds to the debate. First, it clarifies whether or not the large-scale adoption of BEVs leads to fewer and worse jobs or more and better jobs for US workers in the auto sector depends on policy. Battery electric vehicles are coming. They're going to be a substantially larger share of the US auto fleet in just a decade. From the perspective of how many good jobs are in the US auto sector over this time, the coming of BEVs on their own is neither scary or a panacea. It's change. And if there's any economic sector in the US that knows change is perennial and comes fast and furious all the time, it is the auto sector. Change will be handled. If it can be handled poorly, and if industry leaders are slow to adapt and policymakers again take a you're on your own attitude toward US-based auto workers, then the change will hurt. But if it's handled deftly with forward-looking investments and policy measures that help pave the high road to greater US leadership in the sector and job quality, then good jobs can be sustained and even expanded. So specifically, we look at a number of scenarios that will be highly conditioned by policy and investment choices. And the scenarios can be boiled down to four. Scenario one, this is sort of the policy inaction scenario. We do nothing to improve the market share of domestic US producers in any key production segment of BEVs, sort of policy neglect. Scenario two, we make the necessary investments and policy changes that allow domestic producers of BEV batteries and powertrains to achieve the same market share in these battery-powered drivetrains as US-based producers currently enjoy in drivetrains for internal combustion engines. I call this very roughly like parity in BEV powertrains vis-a-vis internal combustion engine powertrains. Scenario three, we make the necessary investments and policy changes that allow US producers to reclaim 10 percentage points of the overall market for car sales in the US. To be super rough, this is basically returning to the market share that prevailed right before the Great Recession. It's not science fiction or ancient history to think this is a doable policy target. And then scenario four, we make all the right policy choices. We do all these investments. We both achieve parity between BEV powertrain production and ICE powertrains, and we reclaim the market share in overall vehicle sales. So a very quick sort of methodology overview of the report, just where we started. We use InPlan, an input-output model, to estimate labor requirements per dollar of vehicles sold domestically. And we figure out labor requirements for each of the inputs along the way and the parts that go into autos. And this is all easy enough for internal combustion engine vehicles. They exist in InPlan. They have labor requirements per dollar of vehicle sold, but BEVs don't really exist in InPlan. So the incredibly rough summary of what we did, and I think only Jim Barrett really knows what an injustice this description is doing to the amount of labor required for what we did, is we took ICEs in the InPlan input-output matrix, we pulled out the powertrain from that matrix, we replaced it with industrial batteries and the associated labor requirements. Then for vehicle assembly, we reduced labor requirements by 30%, reflecting the fact that many analysts think that BEV assembly will require substantially less labor time. For plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, we basically put a BEV powertrain on top of an internal combustion engine powertrain, which makes the entire package of value added for those vehicles about 20% larger. From here, we can estimate the implications for labor requirements, how many jobs will be needed that result from substituting BEVs for ICEs, and we do some policy scenario modeling. And so just going to say a couple words justifying like why we chose these particular targets as our sort of policy condition outcomes. On the first one, sort of equalizing, seeing what happens if we have parity in the domestic content of BEV powertrains vis-a-vis internal combustion engines. I mean, the rationale is pretty clear. Autos are a collection of a huge number of parts. The one part of the parts complex that is substantially different between battery electric vehicles and internal combustion engine vehicles is the powertrain. And so by definition, and currently, the US lags international competitors greatly, as the other speakers have said, in battery production. So by definition, if we continue to lag in the one part of auto production that will be substantially different 10 to 15 years from now, there's going to be fewer jobs supported in the US-based sector. So that's why we think that's an important policy target. Conversely, if instead policy supports forward-thinking investments in BEV powertrain components and especially batteries, then the switch from ICEs to BEVs will not cause downward pressure on employment simply due to us lagging in the production of the newer style powertrains. And then in terms of the overall market share, it is widely expected that the labor requirement for assembling battery electric vehicles will be lower than for internal combustion engines. Turns out this is a pretty contested figure. We used a relatively dire assumption in our report of 30% fewer labor hours required to assemble battery electric vehicles, mostly to show that even under not favorable technological assumptions, that policy can trump everything in terms of what types and how many jobs are created. And so this is market share is a really important policy target because, all else equal, it's not great for prospective US auto employment if there's 30% less labor required per car for assembly. But what's a lot worse than losing 30% of the labor hours required to build a car? Losing all of it. That's basically what happens as we lose market share. So basically, you can make up for any decline in labor requirement hours stemming from lower assembly costs if we can just make the investments needed to reclaim some of the market share. So this graph, and I know it's going to be a little tough to read, but I'm going to walk you through a little bit, and it's in the report, and it has a lot more context. So basically, this just shows the net change in employment given battery electric vehicle penetration if we do everything right, if we make the full package of investments and undertake the policy supports we need to support good jobs in the auto sector. So compared to a policy and action scenario where our current too small share of BEV powertrain components remains fixed, achieving parity between domestic BEV powertrain market and ICE powertrains, we'll basically see employment in parts remain flat rather than substantially decline, with the marginal effect of the policy target boosting employment by about 40,000. So again, if you also talk about a base case of 50% electric vehicle penetration compared to a policy and action scenario that sees no improvement in US market share, if we make investments in policy choices that boost US-based producers' market share by 10 percentage points, we're going to see roughly 106,000 jobs gained or saved, and that's a swing of almost 180,000 jobs. if we hit both policy targets, if we see parity in BEV powertrains and ICE powertrains in terms of domestic content and an increase of 10 percentage points in overall sales, you basically get an increase of 150,000 jobs, which is about what is being highlighted on this graph. And this basically means that policy can actually boost jobs by about 220,000. So it can easily sort of fight off any of the purely technologically induced downward pressure on wages and employment if we just do the right things on investment and policy. So almost finally, we also note that the exercise of just counting the jobs embedded in battery electric vehicles can sometimes lose the forest for the trees. Whatever kind of car US residents are driving in the next 10 to 15 years, we need to be sure that the production of it supports good jobs. Historically, a truth in just about every sector has been that good jobs happen when enough of the sector unionizes. Autos have shown, the auto sector has shown, sadly, that the reverse is also true. If non-union producers, helped by anti-worker policymakers, gain a growing purchase in the market, they can put enormous downward pressure on job quality. Auto jobs are still better than most jobs, particularly for the types of workers who hold them, but the advantage has shrunk a lot as unionization rates in the sector have shrunk. And so this graph shows that basically the unionization rate in the auto sector used to be about 3 times higher than the economy-wide average. Today, it's only about 20% higher. And over that same time period, the median wage in the auto sector used to be about 60% higher than the rest of the economy. Now it's just 7% higher. Still higher, still a better job than average, but the advantage has shrunk enormously as relative unionization rates have also shrunk. And then, of course, besides just creating good jobs, we also want those good jobs to be accessed across a broad range of workers. We all know a primary way non-union producers have managed to find a foothold in the US market is by locating in southern states where right-to-work laws and just more generally more anti-union environment persist. You'd have thought that maybe locating in southern states would mechanically raise the overall share of auto workers who are Black. After all, the overall workforce in the South is about 19% Black as compared to 10.5% in sort of the upper Midwestern states where a lot of the unionized auto sector is hosted. But this is not true. The share of the unionized auto sector workers who are Black is 25.5%, more than twice as high as sort of the surrounding workforce in the Midwest where those jobs live. The share of Black workers in the non-unionized auto sector is under 15%, lower than the overall workforce in the southern states where these non-union auto jobs are predominantly located. So we think ensuring that jobs are unionized and good jobs also means there will be more wider and equitable access to them as well. So where does this leave us? And I'll wrap up here. I'd say good jobs in the auto sector need policy support and they need smart investments, and they won't come naturally. But this has always been the case. It's not a unique and new challenge driven by the introduction of BEVs. It's just a fact of life of this industry and every other industry, and one we've ignored for way too long. Given how useful the widespread adoption of BEVs will be for meeting the challenge of climate change, we really should be careful to not let policymakers botch this transition and just sort of harden resistance to other transitions that need to happen in coming decades. And we really need to get used to the idea that managing the constant change of our economy and the change that workers face much more intelligently going forward needs to be a primary policy goal. And with there, I'll wrap it up, and I'm happy to pass it back to Zoe.
Thanks so much, Josh. And I will quickly turn over to Josh Nasser of the UAW. Take it away.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you, Blue Green Alliance and EPI for the invitation today. It's really an honor to be here on behalf of the United Auto Workers. I think, first of all, I just want to talk about auto jobs because, when we're talking about the auto industry, we're really talking about the heart of U.S. manufacturing. You just not only need to look at all the supply chain jobs that are created, but you also need to look at things like, the history, like with the defense industry and other things where technology started in the auto industry, then spread throughout the economy. So, it's really important to get this right. As other speakers have said, we're really at a crossroads here. We're at a position where we could take a leadership role in building the vehicles of the future, or we can keep our hands tied and not do anything and just watch it slip away. Clearly we need proactive action, and really want to thank the administration, the congressional leaders and everyone who've spoken today for really making the case that we need to take this action aggressively. Now, we're proud at UAW of the fact that a lot of the middle class was good manufacturing middle class jobs were auto jobs to begin with. But what we've seen is over time, we've seen that to become less of the case, unfortunately. The reality is that auto workers and suppliers and final assembly are roughly earning, when adjusted for inflation, roughly 20% less than they were earning 15 years ago. And it's not because they're less productive, they're actually more productive. So why is that? Because workers face a very hostile environment. We have seen that most automakers are not union right now, not unionized. And we've also just seen this is a real atmosphere where the playing field's tilted against workers. Workers choosing to try to join a union are routinely subject to these captive audience meetings where they're lectured day after day about all the reasons not to join a union. The existing penalties for firing workers who want to join a union are laughable. They're pretty much just back pay. They're pretty non-existent. So we see employers across industries, using temp workers. A lot of times for years on end, we call it permatemp because someone shouldn't be a temp worker for years, but that's what we see in a lot of manufacturing. So the playing field is tilted against workers. The Kildee-Stabenow amendment, the policies advocated for and shown in this report, they level the playing field, and they're actually not just positive for unionized workforce. It's positive for all auto workers and all manufacturing workers because it raises standards and it gives incentives for workers to have a voice, because right now the playing field is tilted for that not to be the case. It's already been stated, we have to attack this from a number of different ways. We have to make the vehicles less expensive. Tax credits are really important there. We also have to help the retooling of plants. We need to make sure that communities that are building components that there'll be less jobs, are not forgotten. We need to make sure that new jobs are created where some jobs will decrease. So there's a whole set of supply side initiatives as well, and this Build Back Better is really the time to get it done. This report is really, really timely. I recommend folks to really take its findings and its research very seriously, because we do have an opportunity through deliberate choices of owning the electric vehicle future. But if we continue on the same path we're on right now, that's not going to happen. That's just a simple reality. And I do want to repeat what was said earlier, which is, by Ms. Geese, which is China made deliberate choices. They, made a real extensive effort to build the electric vehicles in China, to bring the components, to build the batteries. We need to make a choice as well. So we're at the right time. I think that we can get this right. We can make sure that manufacturing jobs are good middle class jobs. But we can only do that if we enact policies that level the playing field. So just really want to thank for this opportunity, and just really an honor to speak on behalf of the UAW. I would argue there's no group of workers and retirees that have more on the line than UAW members and retirees right here. So this is very important, and we really do have to get it right. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Josh. And it's a pleasure to turn over to our next speaker, Janelle Jones.
Thanks, Zoe. Thanks all. Thanks for having me to be a part of this conversation. So much of our work at the Labor Department is aiming to build an inclusive recovery that's focused on sectors and occupations where workers were most affected by the pandemic, who are already coping with low wages and poor conditions of employment. But of course, manufacturing is crucial to the overall economic project of building back better. and also avoiding the same mistakes of the last recovery where we took our foot off the gas too soon and certain communities waited too long to see gains of a healthy economy. I should stop saying foot off the gas at electric vehicle events. I will take that note with me. But we have to continue to address inequity in this recovery and in the job market as a whole. And the investments we're looking at in the electric vehicle industry should be seen as an opportunity to do that. I know firsthand the role of manufacturing. My mom has been a UAW member at a Ford assembly plant in Ohio for 27 years. I had to text her this morning to make sure I got the number right. It is indeed 27 years. For dozens of my own family members and thousands of other Black families in the Midwest, it has been a pathway to the middle class. It's always a cause for joy. Family chat goes wild. Facebook posts go everywhere when someone gets hired in because they know they're getting a good job, likely a union job, with a living wage, health insurance, paid time off, and all the other benefits that can come with a strong bargaining contract. So it's especially important to me that we make sure we're providing those opportunities for young families today and ensuring that those jobs remain strong and secure and build a foundation for future generations. One recent example of where the department is trying to make an impact in this area is registered apprenticeships. So earlier this week, the department announced that members of its advisory committee on apprenticeship, which provides advice and recommendations on issues related to registered apprenticeships. An express goal of this committee is the expansion of apprenticeship into new industries and occupations and ensuring equity for underserved and underrepresented populations. They will look to establish innovative apprenticeship and training strategies to build an equitable workforce by delivering a system that is better aligned with the needs of historically marginalized communities. And in June, we awarded more than $99 million in state apprenticeship expansion, equity, and innovation grants to bolster states' efforts to expand programming and inclusive recruitment strategies to attract a diverse workforce. We have also invested nearly $31 million through cooperative agreements to establish 4 registered apprenticeship technical assistance centers of excellence to provide technical assistance to apprenticeship programs. These centers of excellence will provide and expand opportunities in registered apprenticeship for women, for young people, people of color, folks in rural communities, justice-involved individuals, and people with disabilities. And one other thing I'll touch on is I'm helping to lead with my colleague, Alex Hertel-Fernandez, the efforts under President Biden's executive order on racial equity to think about all of the ways that we can embed equity into the programs and policies here at the Labor Department. We're really, taking a whole of department approach to think about how we can reach the most vulnerable workers, where we've done well and, where we've come up short. And questions of equity and inclusion have an uneven legacy at the Department of Labor. On the one hand, landmark labor programs like unemployment insurance, the federal minimum wage, and federal overtime protections have boosted working conditions and labor standards for generations of workers. Yet all too frequently, women and workers of color, and especially Black workers, were written out entirely from these programs' promises of a good life and a good job. This review is a big task. It's huge. We're still doing it. It's going to take a while, but we already have examples of how we are redirecting Labor Department resources to advance economic opportunity and protections for the most disadvantaged. And it's our goal to ensure that this review provides real insight to the administration of workforce programs that feed into manufacturing, and also that we can do it more equitably. Thanks for your time. Thanks to everyone for their great work on this issue. And we're looking forward to how we can partner with the folks here and others on opportunities for growth in electric vehicle manufacturing. Back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Janelle and Josh It's an incredible panel. I had prepared a couple questions, but folks have entirely answered them. I want to just open, and also we're running a little bit over time. I want to just open to any of you who want to talk a little bit. Everyone's talked about being really at a crossroads for working people. And if you have any other reflections just on the one or two, most important things or key things that it's important that Congress and others act on in the short term in terms of seeing better outcomes for workers in the short term.
I'll take that. That's all right for starters. So I think, first of all, we need to the Congress really needs to look at both sides, needs to look at the consumer incentive side, needs to look, actually three sides, the infrastructure to support electric vehicles, but also needs to look at the supply side to make sure that those jobs, and there needs to be, we need to make sure there's good, or U.S. jobs, those are good U.S. jobs too. The other thing that I want to reemphasize that Senator Stabenow said is that, for all of this, for workers to really have a voice and for, these jobs to become stronger throughout the industry, we do need labor law reform. I mentioned some of the anti-labor practices that are really common. So those have to be addressed as well. But time is of the essence, and this is the time to really, plant those seeds as we discussed. Thanks.
Wonderful. Any other input that others might have or want to add? If not, I want to thank the panelists again. This has been an amazing panel. Thank you all for all your work in shaping this future for workers in this industry and beyond. And with this, I want to hand back over to my colleague Jason to introduce the Congresswoman.
So that I can very selfishly have the pleasure of introducing the Congresswoman from the 12th District of Michigan, who is a tireless champion for her constituents and for the issues we're talking about here today, and for all the issues that BGA works on. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us in the middle of a pretty busy day.
Jason, thank you. Everybody, I'm talking to you from the cloakroom of the floor of the House. We're in the middle of a vote series, but I want to thank the Blue Green Alliance for asking me to be with you today. I'm glad I got to listen to the last panel, and what we're all talking about today is so critical, because we are seeing the transformational shift towards electric vehicles, and we have to make sure that's successful. I'm glad to be with my other colleagues in Congress today, members of the administration. I drive Brian Deese nuts, and so many of the important groups that are engaged with us on the front of this. Jason's been part of it. Josh and I have been part of a table where we brought all of the environmental groups together instead of everybody being on opposing sides, which has traditionally been in the last few years where we've been. It was the presidents of all of the environmental groups and Josh and the leadership of the UAW that stayed at the table, and Jason stayed at the table, talked to each other, explained each other's concerns, and we've worked together to get to where we are today. And I think we need to really be clear with people that the science is clear. As I'm sitting here in Washington, my district is having the 8th once in a lifetime storm since the end of June. You can't look at these storms that are happening all over the country. People don't talk about the Midwest as a side enough. It was awful what happened in Louisiana. It's awful when the hurricanes hit Florida and in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut and Pennsylvania. But the Midwest has been hit with repeated storms this summer that have been flooding and destroying things. And the fact of the matter is that 30% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States come from the transportation sector. So we're behind. We need to rapidly transition if we're going to try to address these really serious problems. And everybody's made it clear that the future of the industry is electric. I'm proud of the fact that Michigan's been leading the way on this front already. I stood at the White House with the President of the United States, the President of the United Auto Workers, and the 3 auto CEOs that are based in Michigan, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, where everybody committed to have a goal of 50% EVs by the year 2030. And the president came out to Dearborn, Michigan. I said to him, Mr. President, we need to make the EV, the electric vehicle, is not a foo-foo car. And that's what some people want to think of it as. Right now, many of the vehicles that are out there are too expensive. They're a luxury car that, some people can afford and most can't. But when you see the F-150, the truck that is the #1 selling vehicle in this country, and the performance that it has for so many people. And oh, by the way, if you lose your power, which we're doing in Michigan again, you can go outside and plug into that truck and it'll power your home for almost 3 days, and you can run an office out of that. That's where the future is. So, I'm very focused on this. Going all electric, though, poses a great challenge and a great opportunity. And that's what you're really talking about today. And that's why the study that's coming out today is what's so important. And what brings us all together is the opportunity for us to work together to address it. So I want to applaud the release and the importance of the report we're getting today from the Economic Policy Institute. It's focused on how policy makers can best manage the transformational shift to all electric vehicles through comprehensive modeling, and their recommendations are going to help us succeed long-term. That's what we have to do. We have to succeed long-term. This report makes the stakes clear for industry, workers, and the nation. I know you've already heard from many, and it's been pointed out, the report finds that action now on EV deployment, coupled with strong actions to support the robust electric vehicle manufacturing and supply chains here in the United States, can secure and create meaningful U.S. manufacturing jobs across the automotive sector for so many. A few of the key elements of the report that stick out to me, because it overlaps with what I've been doing with the UAW, with the autos here on the Hill, in the Energy and Commerce Committee. You've talked about, sounds like Debbie talked about making the car. I always say there are 3 buckets. 1, the vehicles have to be affordable. 2, we've got to invest in R&D. We've got to develop a battery that people have confidence in, that has range, and we got to build it here in the United States of America with good paying union jobs. And 3, we got to build out the EV infrastructure, because if people don't think they can charge, they're not going to buy. That's what worries them. And that's what we've been trying to do here while we've been working on Build Back Better and other bills. We need to provide manufacturing incentives to onshore investments. We've got to enhance the share of the EV drivetrain components so that they're produced here domestically. And we've got to secure and strengthen advanced manufacturing capacity. And we got to craft better trade agreements with more reliable enforcement measures. Over this last year, I talked about how we had all gotten together and talked about this. I've introduced a number of bills, as have some of my colleagues, and fought for key investments during the reconciliation process that'll help bolster domestic manufacturing and our supply chains. We have got to bring our supply chains back to this country. It is about our national security as well. We also have to expand and modernize and increase investments into import programs that'll help us develop, retool, and build the vehicles and produce facilities of the future. The Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program and the Domestic Manufacturing Conversion Grant Program at the Department of Energy. These programs frequently get overlooked when we're talking about all of this. They're underutilized and they're ignored. But we have an opportunity to improve and strengthen those programs right now to help us do that shift to a clean economy. And I'm going to keep fighting for those in this Congress. By making smart policy changes and investments, along with I heard Josh talk about those strong labor standards. Josh Nasser and I talk every day. I work closely with him and my other brothers and sisters in the UAW, but I'm working with the other unions too, because it's more than the UAW that's concerned about this. But we can, if we're doing this, employment in the US sector could rise by 150,000 jobs in 2030, according to this report that you've released today. And that's why this report's so important. It demonstrates the powerful impact that proactive pro-worker manufacturing policy investments will have on ensuring robust onshore electric vehicle manufacturing and supply chains that will uplift workers, safeguard the auto employment, and bring good jobs back to this country. I could go on about this forever. I do want to say this to you. I think we also need to know, I have told everybody this, some people, you've heard me and not, we need to lose the word green jobs. We need to talk about good paying jobs in America, because too many union workers, and this is a problem that Josh has in the UAW, I hear it in the union halls, are really worried that it's going to cost them their jobs. It's not going to cost them their jobs. We're going to create more when we bring that supply chain back, when we make sure we're making those batteries here, when we have good, smart domestic policy that creates these jobs. We have to figure out how we talk to working men and women who hear all this gibberish, instead of the real facts, and worry they're either going to lose their job or they're going to get a new job that's going to pay less. We got to pay a decent wage. We got to bring those jobs home, and we are going to create an even stronger economy and protect our environment at the same time. So thank you again to the Blue Green Alliance for having me, as well as all the labor and environmental voices that are here at today's event. We need to take this report. We need to spread the word. We got to support a strong American workforce and U.S. manufacturing, and it'll help ensure that we have this monumental transition at this moment in time in our country. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and for all the work that you also have been doing on these topics in Congress. With this, I want to turn over to Brad Markell of the AFL-CIO Industrial Union Council to kick off the final panel.
All right, thank you, Zoe, and thank you to everybody who's talked so far. Mrs. Dingell is my Congresswoman, so happy to see you here, still making progress on these issues for so many years. The thing that we want to focus on this panel is the upsides and what can happen for workers and communities. As we move through fighting climate change, we can't afford to just reorder our economy, spend trillions of dollars, and not address issues like inequality and environmental justice and job quality and job creation. So the panel here today is going to talk a little bit about a few of those things. We're being joined by Roman Partida Lopez, who is the legal counsel for transportation equity for Greenlining, and Luke Tadashel, my old friend, who is the director of the Clean Fuels and Vehicles Group at NRDC. And this is an exciting discussion because it really is important for us to focus on, as we're cleaning up the climate, what are we doing around jobs and equity and inclusion? So Roman, I want to start with you. There are a lot of equity issues surrounding EVs, from access to the vehicles themselves to access to the jobs they create, and certainly the very uneven burden of transportation pollution that light duty vehicles generate. Talk to us a little bit about how you in Greenlining think about the opportunity here, and give us some advice about how to move forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brad, for that introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. Roman Partida Lopez with the Greenlining Institute. We're a racial and economic equity advocacy organization working to redress the impacts of redlining on low-income communities of color. And I think as we have heard previously in the conversation, right, I think for Greenlining, our work is really focused on reducing poverty and pollution in our most impacted communities, right? As it was said earlier, we don't need to choose between good jobs and clean air. We can do both. But in order to do both and improve the quality of life of our frontline communities, we must embed equity in the work that we're doing. So we're really thankful for VGA and EPI and our labor partners for allowing us to be part of this discussion and this report to really help highlight and uplift equity considerations as we transition to zero emission vehicles. Brad, as you mentioned, there's a lot of potential, but then also potential challenges in this transition, both for jobs, but also for our communities. And this is why it's critical that as we act now, we do so in a very intentional way by centering equity in the work that in the policies and investments that we do. And as we saw from the report, workers of color, and most notably, Black auto workers, and those that don't have a 4-year degree have the most to gain and potentially the most to lose if we don't approach this transition with an equity lens. So from our perspective, we have to operationalize equity in the work that we do. And what that means is really thinking about how equity is being defined, how we're setting up standards, how are we ensuring that equity is showing up in everything from goals, vision, and values to the processes, to the implementation, and to the analysis itself. As Janelle Jones mentioned earlier, where there was a really intentional approach to reach the most vulnerable workers and communities. That's the path that we have to take, right? We have to understand what are the challenges that we foresee, what are the opportunities that we have, and then where are the gaps, right? Where do we need to really provide that support? Burdens on our communities and within our workers. So as we move this discussion forward and we think about how we center and embed equity, right? Again, they must really emphasize race-conscious solutions. We know, the historic inequities that our communities have faced. We must prioritize multi-sector approaches. It can't just be about the technology, but it must be about the people that it's impacting, and ensuring that we're working across departments to make sure that not only we're providing good jobs, but that we're also providing incentives and other forms of benefits, direct benefits to our communities to make sure that they are benefiting from this transition. We're very intentional of delivering direct and meaningful benefits, right? Not just indirect, but really meaningful by providing those good jobs, but then providing those clean air direct benefits by allowing them to also access the vehicles. It must be community driven at every stage, right? I think we talk about community driven solutions all the time, but here's a great opportunity both to build off the expertise of our labor partners, but then also from the communities themselves, right? Where potentially, we'll see some of this deployment happen. Potentially what we see new manufacturing facilities come to be, and ensuring that we're working closely with those communities to make sure that we're seeing those direct benefits. And of course, establishing clear paths towards wealth building, right? I think we can't lose sight of that and ensure that that continues to be at the forefront of the work that we do. And as we develop these policies, that we do so in a way that is addressing all these different standards that I just highlighted. I know I don't have a lot of time, but I just want to really quickly just mention one last thing. That equity, cannot just be a talking point, right? It has to be a practice. And this means that as we move forward and we have these conversations, we must approach it in a holistic way and ensure that in every policy or investment that we make, that equity shows up, and equity shows up in a meaningful way, and that we're defining it. That we're ensuring that we know who we're talking about, the communities that we're trying to address, to make sure that we do provide those benefits, those direct and meaningful benefits to our communities.
Thank you, Roman. And one thing we've learned about equity is if we're not intentional, we're not going to get there. That is for darn sure. Let's turn to Luke. Luke, we've worked together over a long period of time on auto issues, and NRDC, has always maintained a deep well of expertise on these issues, both the technical issues and the kind of industry issues. So, and I'm sure that is the case when it comes to EVs. So please tell us a little bit about what you guys have been up to and how you are thinking about the opportunity here and what the report is telling us today.
Great, thank you, Brad, and good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today, and I really appreciate the invitation from the Blue-Green Alliance and our partnership with BJ and labor organizations. NRDC is focused on safeguarding the rights of all Americans to clean air, clean water, and a healthy planet. And that's why I'm excited about the opportunity before us. We are beginning the transformation from polluting gasoline vehicles to zero-emission electric vehicles. With the right policies and investments, we can create good jobs by building a globally leading electric vehicle industry, from battery production to vehicle assembly to charging station installation. And as you've heard, thankfully, Congress is considering historic investments in this industry, ones that will benefit workers and the environment. And it must follow through. Now is the time to put it in drive and to hit the accelerator. Recently, NRDC has been taking a deeper look at some of the job opportunities if the US brought more battery production to the US internally. We commissioned a study, and the preliminary results are very encouraging. As folks may know, battery production includes processing of lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, and graphite compounds to create the chemicals that go in to make battery components, such as cathodes, anodes, and electrolytes. The report is examining the chemical processing, not the extraction of these materials. Today, most of the chemical processing and the cathode and anode production occur in Asia. If we want to meet the growing demand for EV batteries with US production, It's estimated that we need to invest approximately 35 billion in these chemical processing steps by 2030. This would put us, the US, on a pathway to meet 100% of US EV car sales with US produced batteries by 2035. This would also enable the US to leap ahead in the production of electric freight trucks so that we can dramatically reduce the pollution in hard-hit communities near freight corridors and ports. Also, with that investment in the battery chemical processing, it's estimated that the US would create approximately 70,000 jobs by 2030. Importantly, a focused strategy of investment can create EV supply chain hubs that bring together the chemical processing, the battery manufacturing, and vehicle assembly to communities with strong histories and skills in vehicle manufacturing, as we heard from, for example, Mayor Brown earlier today. We should absolutely grab this opportunity. Fortunately, incentives for US produced vehicles and batteries are being proposed in Congress, and they are important steps towards realizing the promise of more clean vehicle jobs in the future. And if we do it right, these can be high road union jobs. Simply put, cleaning up the environment and boosting good American jobs can and should go hand in hand. So we look forward to the opportunity in front of us. And Brad, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Luke. And Luke and Roman, I would love nothing more to quiz you guys with some stump the dummy type questions, but we're right actually hitting our marks. Thank you so much for your participation in putting the report together and for what you've said here today. I'm going to pull Zoe in now so we can wrap it up. We are going to hit 1:30. And Zoe, let me turn it over to you for a quick through remarks, and then I will tie a bow on it when you're done.
Sounds great. And I really will be quick. I want to thank our powerful speakers and panelists for all the insight, expertise, vision that they have articulated today. I want to thank everybody who's on the phone or on the computer listening to us today, and for really what both participants and panelists and the audience are doing to drive forward towards a future that not only speeds us towards electric vehicles, but provides the basis for a strong and growing and more equitable future for working people. And on that vein, I'll turn back to Brad for the last word.
Well, look, as a long time member of the auto workers and somebody who started out at a GM assembly plant, this stuff is really close to my heart and really important to me and my community. What we heard here today is that policy matters a lot. The direction that the Biden administration has put forward for the auto industry, for manufacturing, for the climate is really important. The policy levers that are on the table now can really help the industry, help us with diversity, help us with inequality. As Josh says, we have a crisis of job quality in the auto industry, and that is something that needs to turn around. We can do it with the right set of policies, and this report lays out clearly what the stakes are and where the levers are. So thanks everybody for your participation, and let's get to work and get this thing done.